Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar this afternoon. I'm just waiting a couple of moments as I'm just seeing a few people joining us, so just giving us a bit of time before we jump into things. So the number of people is increasing. So okay, cool. We might kick off the webinar for this afternoon. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to today's webinar on mastering pay and payroll compliance, common payroll mistakes and how to prevent them. Managing employee pay and payroll can be challenging for small business owners and managers, and it gets even harder when you're dealing with many different employees and employment types, different awards, pay schedules, and the like. In a recent submission to the Department of Employment Workplace Relations investigation into wage theft, the Australian Human Resources Institute included the following statement, which I think goes to the heart of a lot of the payroll issues that a lot of small business owners feel. Australia's industrial relations landscape is much more complex than in other countries, due in large part to its complicated and outdated award system. As a result, its application through payroll systems can be challenging for employers, particularly small businesses. The risk of making an honest mistake is much greater in Australia, where over 97% of businesses are small businesses. Today's session is really a back to basics review, looking closely at compliance and payroll mistakes we often see small SMEs make. Today we'll cover essential payroll tax and super obligations, the difference between the employment types and different payroll requirements, the importance of understanding award coverage, rates and other entitlements, getting termination pay and entitlements right, and also new laws criminalising wage theft. Before we go further, I'd just like to introduce our experts today for today's session. So we have Fiona from MyHR Payroll, and we also have Jasmine from the Australian Payroll Association. Fiona, do you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. So, hi, everyone. I am a seasoned bookkeeper for about 20 years. Of those 20 years, 15 I have been doing payroll, and I love everything about it. I have worked in different industries, so I've been across hospitality, restaurants, yoga studios, even tradies. So
Wow.
Doing payrolls for all sorts of businesses and industries. And it's something that I now sort of want to specialize in. So from bookkeeping directly into payroll.
Yeah, nice. Cool. And Jasmine, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. So I have probably about 25 years of payroll / HR experience. I've kind of moved between the two over the last 25 years, but firmly in the last 7 years at least back in the payroll space here at APA. So what I do here as Head of Member Services is really look after all of our membership offerings, including the support to all of our members. But I also head up our training here as well. So all of our training programs fall under me and my team.
Yeah, nice.
And similar to Fiona, love payroll.
Yeah.
Well, that's handy. Two people who love payroll for a payroll webinar. That's great. And we'll also go do a bit more of a deep dive on the Australian Payroll Association a little bit as well. I should introduce myself as well. My name's Julian. I'm the country manager for MyHR Australia. I should also point out that today's session is being recorded. The recordings will be available in a range of places afterwards, but primarily on the MyHR website. Any questions will be recorded. We love questions. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to just add them to the Q&A. You should see a sort of Q&A section there where you can submit questions. We also have a Q&A session at the back of the webinar today, or at the end of the webinar today rather. So feel free to stick around and ask some questions there. But yeah, they will be recorded, so just include details that you're happy to share publicly. So just jumping into it, today's agenda, just sort of running through broadly different employment types and sort of payroll implications, awards and entitlements. Termination pay is a big one. I know that we get a lot of queries from our clients on. There's some changes coming, or some legislation that's been introduced that's coming into effect from next year around wage theft. So just touching on that. Fiona's going to take us through payroll tax and super obligations, and also best practice tips for running payroll. And then, as I mentioned, we've got a sort of a section at the end dedicated to questions. Before we jump into it, just a little bit on my HR. We run these webinars on a regular sort of monthly basis on a range of different topics. Effectively, my HR's been around for a bit over a decade now, originally from New Zealand, but very much firmly in the Australian market as well. And really, we see ourselves as the HR and the payroll department for businesses who don't have one. So really working primarily with small and medium-sized businesses who, you know, are big enough to employ a reasonable number of employees, but aren't big enough necessarily to have their own internal HR department. As part of that, we have an HR platform that is, you know, HRIS system, manages onboarding, leave, HR documents, and that sort of thing. We also have a payroll platform. We also have an outsourced payroll service as well. So, and we see it as very much being powered by HR and payroll professionals. So that's just a little bit about my HR. And Jasmine, you were just going to talk to us through the Australian Payroll Association.
Yeah, so it's just a little bit about APA. Look, our mission here, and if you come to our office, you'll see this on the wall. It's creating confidence in how people are paid. So everything that we do with that lens in focus. We do that by providing payroll professionals with the support they need, and we currently support around 7,000 Australian payroll professionals. So that's through our membership support and our help desk. It's through the training that we have and all related to payroll topics. So our training can be either classroom-based or virtual training or online self-paced training. We have an advisory team that focus on payroll and compliance reviews. So if you think you've got an issue with your payroll, we can actually come in and have a look at that. We have payroll qualifications under our sister company, the Australian Payroll Institute, both a certificate for and a diploma in payroll. And we also have a recruitment team as well to help you find the right payroll people for your business.
Yeah, nice. Excellent. How many members did you say that you guys have, Jasmine?
So we currently support about 7,000 people.
Wow.
7,000 individuals who are primarily in payroll, but a lot of those can be bookkeepers as well, and some HR as well.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, nice. I've actually recently used the service myself for a query from one of our clients. So it was really good.
Hopefully you got a good response.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you for that, Jasmine. Look, we've got a poll. I might launch the poll now. So just bear with me one moment. And launching now. Hope everyone can see that, but feel free just to submit a response. Really, it's just around level of confidence as how you're paying your employees. You know, how confident are you? You know, it looks like we've got a few responses coming through. So I might just leave it open for a couple of moments now. But we're seeing a good mix coming through there. Okay, that looks to be about the end of it there. So, okay, so good mix, very confident, somewhat confident, you know, sort of not confident at all. If I end the poll, will that show the result? Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't sharing the results, but I think I should be sharing the results now. Is it coming up on the?
Yes, we can see them now.
Cool. So any sort of initial thoughts or comments on those results, guys? Pretty much what we sort of expected, I suppose.
Yeah, look, the somewhat confident. I think that's how a lot of payroll people feel. You're doing payroll every day. And from my perspective, and certainly in my time in payroll, you might feel like you're doing something really well, but then you also don't know what you don't know. And certainly when I started here at APA, I thought I knew so much about payroll, and I learned very quickly I didn't know half as much as what I thought I did. And in the last 7 years, obviously I've learned a lot more. So one of the things with payroll really is you don't know what you don't know, and there's so much legislation. So I can understand people not feeling confident because it changes so rapidly, the payroll legislation, but yeah, they're pretty typical results, I would think.
Yeah, totally. I think you're right. And then all it takes is like a decision or reading an article, and then you sort of start second guessing yourself around, it could be a range of different things really. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you can never be sort of too confident, but it's good to see that there are some confident people out there. But yeah, they're sort of somewhat confident. I think we see a lot of people in that space. So I'm going to get out of that poll and move into the slides proper. Okay, so I think as a sort of, I sort of mentioned at the start, really looking at sort of back to basics review. I mean, we deal with a lot of SMEs, new business owners really in sort of our capacity. And so often it's sort of the real basic stuff that we, assist them with. So obviously there's, differing employment types within Australia, which we're all sort of familiar with, full-time, part-time, casual, fixed term, and so on and so forth. And they obviously have some different payroll obligations attached to them. I think maybe starting with casuals, Jasmine, there's been a few changes to do with casual employment over the years, over the last few years in particular. Maybe you can sort of run us through the sort of current state of affairs when it comes to, managing casual employees.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, it's changed a lot over the last few years. And in 2021, we've got for the first time a definition of a casual in the Fair Work Act, and some requirements to convert casuals to permanent in the National Employment Standards. But that changed on the 26th of August this year. So just under a month ago, our obligations for casuals did actually change. So we do now have a new definition of a casual in the Fair Work Act. It's quite similar to the old definition in that essentially you can't have a firm advance commitment of ongoing and regular work for there to be a casual. But they've also added in a section around assessing the entire employment relationship to determine if someone's a casual. So not just looking at the start of employment, are they a casual based on their contract, but what is the actual overall employment? Looking at things like, can an employer choose to not offer shifts? Because that would be the nature of a casual employment, that you don't have to offer shifts. Can a casual employee actually decline shifts? That would indicate that they are genuinely a casual. Do you have other full-time and part-time employees doing the same role? In which case, Fair Work might ask, why are you hiring casuals if you've already got permanent employees doing the same roles? So now you've got to actually look at the entire employment relationship and not just when you are engaging them. The other thing that they added was they have to be paid a separate rate of pay, but additionally a casual loading, for example. So that needs to be separately identifiable. The other core thing that changed on the 26th of August for casuals were the casual conversion requirements. So under the previous legislation, the obligation was on the employer to review a casual employee service at 12 months. And if they met the requirements, then the employer was obligated to offer them permanent employment, either as a part-time or casual employee, part-time or full-time employee. Now that employee didn't have to accept the offer, they could remain a casual if they want, but the onus was on the employer. That has now changed. The onus has now moved back to the employee to whether they want to go to casual, and then they need to make a notification to the employer if they want to change from casual to full-time or part-time. So often we see with legislation, it creates more obligations on employers, but this is one of the first times where we look at it and go, actually, it's removed an obligation from the employer and it's made it a little bit easier because the obligation's now gone back to the employee.
Yeah, back to the employee, yeah. It does seem to me like it's probably a better balance in terms of, in terms of that process. Like it was quite onerous, right?
Absolutely.
The way it previously
looking at
was.
your casual employees at 12 months on their 12-month anniversary and have to go through this whole process and potentially even send them a letter telling them that you're not offering them permanent employment was really, really onerous and took a lot of time. So I think this is a really positive move forward. It's putting it back on the employee to choose if they want to move to permanent or not. Then they start the process.
Yeah, nice. In terms of like casuals, the casual loading, so maybe just talk us through. I get this. We get this question a lot from clients around, what is the casual loading? How much is it? What's it there for? Like, maybe if you sort of just talk us through.
Sure. So the casual loading itself, all awards will have a casual loading within it. If you're covered by an enterprise agreement, it should have that as well. And it's always 25%. Some awards do have higher rates for casual loading depending on certain times, but usually it's 25%. And that's to compensate an employee, a casual employee, for not having any paid leave types. So they don't get annual leave, they don't get personal leave, they don't get paid compassionate leave. They do get long service leave. That one's often misunderstood. Casuals are entitled to long service leave, but your other paid leave types, they're generally not entitled to. So that's what the 25% loading covers them for. It also covers them for the fact that they don't get notice periods or redundancy pay as well. So you take your permanent employees rate of pay, you add 25%, and then you've got your casual rate of pay.
Yeah. And are there benefits to having it as like a separately identifiable amount, like either in the pay slip or in the employee's contract?
Absolutely, both, preferably. Fair Work does say that it should be separately identifiable on a payslip, the actual loading component. So you shouldn't have a fully loaded rate. But if your payroll system can't accommodate that, they do say that there should be a note on the payslip to actually state that the rate is inclusive of the casual loading. One of the other things to be mindful of is if you do use fully loaded rates in your payroll system, that includes the loading, then sometimes, depending on the award that you pay under, it could result in you overpaying your casuals and their work overtime. Because in most awards, the overtime rate is not calculated on the fully loaded rate. It's actually a different calculation. So it's always beneficial to have it separated out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm not intimately involved in payroll, but I feel like particularly maybe in SMEs, it seems often it's like what we see is that it's a loaded rate inclusive of the casual loading.
Yeah.
Would you say that's sort of more common than?
It is very common. We always advise to try not to do that if possible.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are some payroll systems that it might be difficult to actually accommodate that. And that's why Fair Work does say you could have a note on the payslip instead.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, another one that comes up a lot, I know with a lot of our clients, is contractors versus employees. I know there's a lot spoken about them, but if you could just sort of give us a run through of the key differences there and the impact of getting that one wrong.
Absolutely. We get this one a lot as well. So many questions about contractors. Again, common misconception that if you have an independent contractor who gives you an invoice and has an ABN, then you don't have any obligations for that person and they're treated completely separately and you pay them through accounts payable and you don't have to worry about them from a payroll perspective, and that's not the case. And there's a few different components here. So contractors, for one, even if they are a genuine independent contractor, may still have an obligation to have super paid for them, primarily if the work that they are performing is primarily for a service rather than a product, so a service, and for their effort, physical effort, mental effort, whatever the case may be. So it's highly likely that your independent contractors are employees for the purpose of the superannuation guarantee. Payroll tax as well is payable for your contractors, your independent contractors. There are some exemptions, but they're rare, so you would probably be paying payroll tax for them as well. And then there's the whole Fair Work side of things and what we refer to, or what they refer to, as sham contracting, which is where you have employers who might engage someone as a contractor in order to avoid their obligations under awards and the NES. So you pay a flat rate of pay to a contractor and you're not paying leave entitlements and you're not paying penalty rates and overtime and all of those sorts of things. If the person is deemed to be an employee because they're performing the sort of work in the way that an employee would perform the work, then Fair Work looks pretty harshly upon that. That's why they call it sham contracting. If they're doing the work of an employee, they should be engaged as an employee.
Yeah, totally. And obviously, sort of potential sort of financial penalties and that sort of thing if you're found to be engaged in sham contracting.
It's the same as any sort of penalties under the Fair Work Act. You know, if you underpay under an award, it's all of that same sort of stuff. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So moving on. So yeah, speaking of awards, can't really talk about payroll in Australia without touching on modern awards. We've sort of got that that triangle there on the screen, which you see it a lot. Oh, I've seen it a lot anyway. Just as like a bit of a summary of how entitlements, tend to work under the Fair Work Act, and you've got your sort of your national employment standards, or the Fair Work Act and the national employment standards really just sort of setting the foundation as sort of your minimum entitlements there. Annual leave, personal carers leave, and so on. And then there's sort of next layering there which is your modern awards or your enterprise agreements for most employees. Particularly most employees of small and medium-sized businesses, you'd say modern awards applying. And certainly we've got clients, from retail through to hospitality, caring services and that sort of thing, covered by modern awards. And then they obviously set additional sets of minimum entitlements, based on the industry, based on the occupation of the employee, and those around hours of work, penalty rates, overtime, allowances, etc. And then obviously workplaces want to set individual individual contractual terms or policies that apply within the workplace in order to attract and retain staff. So I guess, and we've got a list of sort of common areas there that we see again, sort of a lot of our clients. But Jasmine, just so starting basics, why do you think it's important to know the modern award coverage of your employees?
Well, that's the only way you're going to know if you're paying them correctly. So we see this all the time. Look, award coverage isn't easy, trying to find the right award. I mean, sometimes it's easy, right? If you own a shop and you've got retail employees, then it's probably the case that they're covered by the General Retail Industry Award. So sometimes you can kind of go, oh, we definitely know the award coverage and that's fine. But sometimes it's not as black and white as that. You might have an IT person working for your retailer. They don't have a classification in the retail award, so therefore you'd need to find a different award based on their occupation potentially. So award coverage is not easy, but it is very, very important because it is the award that does set out the minimum wages that you have to pay for their classification level. What are their penalty rates? What are their overtime? What are their allowances? And if you've got the wrong award, then you could very well be underpaying or even overpaying your employees if you're not paying them with the correct award.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And that's it. It's really the fundamentals of just knowing what your minimum obligations are. I think we see it a lot with there are some industries, it seems, that retail is probably a good example. A lot of retail businesses covered by the General Retail Industry Award, basically pay their employees per the award. So they pay the sort of minimum award rate of pay and then penalties and allowances and overtime per the award. But then you've got other industries where employees are often compensated through an annual salary. So that's where I think we see a lot of confusion there. Like, what's your advice to employers who have award covered employees, but they want to pay them an annual salary?
Yeah, so you can absolutely do that. I think one of the most common misconceptions is that if you give an employee a contract with an annual salary, it means they're award free. But that is definitely not the case. They are still covered by an award, highly likely. So what you need to do is ensure that the annual salary that you are paying is actually compensating them appropriately for all the hours that they are working based on their award conditions. So if you pay someone $70,000 salary and you say this is going to cover you for your minimum rates and your penalty rates and your allowances and your overtime, well, you actually need to make sure it does cover them for all of those things because you can't underpay them as per the award. And we have a perfect example in the retail industry where significant underpayments did occur. I don't like to pick on Woolworths, but I mean, it was in the media. It's not a secret. $600 million underpaid, mostly to store managers and store assistant managers who were on annualized salaries. So basically the sorts of hours that they were doing, the fact that they were working weekends, they were doing significant amounts of overtime. And if you actually looked at the hours that they worked and what their entitlements would have been under the award, their salaries did not cover them appropriately. So we find when you do see all of these kind of underpayment articles, a lot of it is around annualized salaries. So you need to be confident that your salary is actually compensating the employees for the work that they're doing and for the hours that they are working.
Totally. And yeah, we see it a lot with clients and they'll say, is that enough what we're paying? And it's like, well, we can't really make an assessment without knowing the employee's roster, how many hours they're going to be working, what other entitlements that
you need to have some assumptions in there when you're pulling that salary together. How many hours of overtime do you think they might work? And you should be monitoring that as well.
I think importantly, and not necessarily a payroll issue as well, but ensuring that the contract reflects that arrangement. So having like an offset clause in there as well, which clearly states that those award entitlements are going to, be absorbed or be included within the annual salary as well.
And that's where
really
they should definitely be getting that HR/legal advice when you're looking at employment contracts. No one wants to pay workplace lawyers. They do cost a lot of money, but they'll save you money in the long run from doing the wrong thing. So
totally.
Definitely worth having a lawyer actually looking over your employment contracts.
No worries. Any other thoughts or comments around awards and entitlements? I know we've got a lot to get through today, but anything else you wanted to touch on there?
My advice would probably be, if you know what award that you're covered by, subscribe to the Fair Work Ombudsman's award service. So you can actually register on their website and subscribe to your particular award, which means any change that comes through will be emailed to you directly. So many people get things wrong because they don't realize there's been a change to the award. So
totally.
I recommend subscribe to your award. I subscribe to all 122 of them. My inbox is always full.
I do too.
Yeah, I've got a lot as well. And just on that as well, just make sure you know the award. Like, read it back to front. As employers, just know what your employees are entitled to, and keep abreast of that constantly. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, on that, like there was to change the Professional Employees Award, I think a couple of years ago, introducing overtime. It's amazing how many, how often that comes up and people just aren't across the introduction of that.
The changes don't just happen on 1 July every year. They can happen at any time throughout.
At any time, yeah,
so
totally.
Always need to be on top of them.
All right, termination pay. So, terminations are rarely fun. Possibly dealing with a range of issues at the time, potentially a difficult person, potentially looking at other risks like unfair dismissal risks and that sort of thing. An employer might be worried that they may not get their company equipment back from people. There's a whole range of considerations that's going through the heads of employers when making the call around termination. But do find that termination pay, we do get a lot of queries about that, and it does cause a few headaches. So thought it was worth touching on. Maybe start with notice periods, because this seems to throw a lot of people. So Jasmine, where do notice periods come from?
They actually come from a few different places, depending on who is initiating the termination. So if the employer is initiating the termination, so that is a dismissal, maybe it's redundancy, maybe it's poor performance, whatever the case may be, the minimum notice period that you're required to give comes from the National Employment Standards. So you can offer more notice, but the NES gives you the minimums. For an employee, their notice period, if they are resigning, will come from their award, if they are covered by an award, their registered agreement, or potentially their contract of employment. But again, they're the minimum notice periods. Often you will find employers in their contract of employment who will have different notice periods. They just can't be less than the minimums. So if the NES says that employer has to give 4 weeks notice, you can't give less than 4 weeks notice in your contract. So it can come from contracts as well, but the awards and the NES set out the minimums for the notice periods. And they will be based on service, length of service.
Length of service, yeah, cool. Another one that comes up is around whether we want the person to work the notice period or pay them in lieu of notice, gardening leave. Maybe if you can just sort of talk us through the differences there and the different obligations that
so they're the three main things that you might do with the notice period. So regardless of what might be happening with the employee, they're entitled to notice unless they're a casual. Casuals don't get notice unless their award says so, but generally not. So you have a choice. If you are terminating someone or if someone's resigning, you have a choice to either have them work their notice period, which is fine. They just work as normal. They finish up on their last day and off they go, and you pay out their entitlements. And nothing changes in the notice period. It's just normal pay for normal work. The other option is if you may not want the employee to work the notice period, then you've got two options there potentially. One is to terminate them immediately and make a payment in lieu of notice. So that's paying out the notice period, and that payment has to be equivalent to what the employee would have been paid had they worked the notice period. So it's not just at their base rate of pay, but it's at For example, if they pay allowances, if they work night shift, you have to pay those things as well in the payment in lieu of notice, because it must be the same as what they would have received had they worked that notice. That means that essentially their termination ends immediately, all entitlements end on that day, and you make that payment instead in lieu of the notice period. The third option is gardening leave. You should always get some HR advice around whether you are able to put your employees on gardening leave. And gardening leave is when the employee remains employed by you during the notice period. You just don't want them to work. So it's essentially working the notice period without actually doing any work. All of the terms and conditions stay the same. They're still an employee getting their ordinary pay for the period of the gardening leave, and their employment doesn't end until the end of the gardening leave period. One of my ex-employers, we had a very senior employee who had a 6-month notice period in his contract. And when he resigned, because he was going to work for a competitor, they exercised the right to gardening leave. So he sat at home or did the gardening for 6 months.
6 months.
While continuing to be paid his normal salary for that 6-month period. And what that does is employers might use it to prevent an employee from going to work for a competitor for a particular period of time.
Yeah.
That's when we see it used the most.
Okay. Another question we get a lot is the payment of entitlements on termination. We get a lot of queries from clients who are unsure of when they need to pay, whether they can just wait till the next pay, or whether they can pay it in installments. Sometimes we get those sort of queries as well. What's your advice there around when entitlements need to be paid out on termination?
So most final pay entitlements, again, will come from the modern award. So all modern awards will have a clause within it to state when you have to pay those entitlements. Now, a lot of them state that it's within 7 days. Now, that's 7 calendar days, but that's not the default. You will find some awards where the payment has to be made, for example, on the last day of employment. So always check your award obligations, because they will tell you when the final pay needs to be made. And that's for things like the final wages, annual leave on termination. Long service leave is a little bit different, because that's based on the state and territory legislation. Most states and territories require long service leave to be paid on the last day of employment. You don't actually get that 7-day period, but you do need to check the relevant state territory legislation specifically. The other one is the payment in lieu of notice. That also doesn't fall under the award payment period. It is separate. And there was actually a court case last year, 2023, it might have been the year before, 2022. There was a court case that actually clarified that under the Fair Work Act, in order for a termination to be lawful, a payment in lieu of notice must not be made later than the date of termination. So essentially, if you are dismissing someone and you're deciding to make a payment in lieu of notice, you need to pay that immediately. You can't wait 7 days. For all other entitlements, if you don't have an award, or if your award is silent, or if your agreement is silent, then Fair Work says best practice is to pay within 7 days. But that does not relate to payment in lieu of notice, and that does not relate to long service leave. Right.
Okay. So some exclusions there. Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So thought we'd touch a little bit on some change to legislation there around wage theft criminalisation. So effectively, this comes into effect from the 1st of Jan next year. It applies to where an employer is required to pay an amount and intentionally fails to pay those amounts. And there are significant penalties there that apply. I think we've seen, and you've made mention there, Jasmine, around some, high profile underpayment cases that we've seen in the media over the last sort of 5 years or so. It does seem most of those are unintentional. There's certainly been some high profile cases that are clearly intentional. But yeah, what are your thoughts around the sort of intentionality with this legislation?
Yeah, so this one has got a few people worried. And look, we already have a regime and penalties, I guess, under the civil regime, not under criminal penalties, but civil penalties, which Fair Work can take employers to court. And we've seen that a lot in the last few years, and we've certainly seen the amounts of the fines increase where it has been deemed to have been deliberate. I think the largest fine so far to date was actually the Commonwealth Bank. Now, the Commonwealth Bank did declare to Fair Work. It was they self-declared to Fair Work that they had underpaid, and they rectified it off their own back. But the reason why their fine was so big was because they actually knew there was a problem for 2 years before they did anything about it. So Fair Work did not look very favourably on that. So if you do find that you've made a mistake, and mistakes do happen in payroll all the time, if you do find you made a mistake, try and fix it as soon as possible. Well, what we have now under the new legislation that you mentioned is coming in on 1 January is that it will be criminalised. And from that point of view, it's around where they can actually prove that the underpayment was intentional. So as with all criminal cases, and I'm not a lawyer, but as with all criminal cases, apparently there has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it has occurred in order for there to be a conviction. So the same would apply for this. It has to be beyond reasonable doubt that it has occurred intentionally and was not just a genuine error or mistake. Employers that are found to have a genuine error or mistake will not be prosecuted under the wage theft criminalisation laws.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's part of the reason why, you know, our organisations exist, right? It's because this stuff is complicated.
Absolutely.
So mistakes do happen, and we see it all the time.
All the time. People try and do the right thing. That's why they're members of ours, because they want to do the right thing and they want to make sure that they are, and they've got that sounding board to make sure that they are.
Totally. Yeah. Quite different though from, you know, those stories you read of employers who clearly have intentionally done the wrong thing despite being advised previously that they've done the wrong thing and haven't really changed their practices. Yeah. And again, that's what.
Again, that's been penalised previously as well, but it's going to be harsher now.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest ones we saw there is my favourite dumpling restaurant, Din Tai Fung.
Yes.
For those of you who like Din Tai Fung, please don't boycott them. They have new owners now who are apparently doing the right thing. But the previous owners, they were certainly prosecuted, not under the criminalisation, but under the current laws for intentional underpayments. They were falsifying pay slips and records as well and providing false records to Fair Work. So that is the sort of thing that under the new legislation would potentially go down that wage theft criminalisation prosecution.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Payroll tax. Fiona.
Yeah. Let's talk payroll tax.
Let's talk payroll tax. So, I don't know. I don't really know anything about payroll tax. So let's just start from the basics. Like, if I'm an employer, do I need to pay payroll tax?
Not necessarily. It all depends on what state you're in and how much your Australian wages are per year. So depending on what state you're in. So if we take Queensland, for instance, if your Australian wages are over $1.3 million, you will need to start paying tax on your payroll. So you pay your wages, you pay your super, and then at the end of the month, so you usually have about a week or usually about 8 days to pay your tax on the wages that have been paid in the previous month.
Okay, so are you saying it's 1.3 million?
At the moment for Queensland. In other states and territories, it does change. So New South Wales is different to Queensland, Northern Territory is different to everyone as well. And everyone has a different percentage range that they would need to pay on their payroll wages.
And is that threshold amount the amount paid within that state, or is it within the country more broadly, or how's that?
They do define it as Australian wages. So if you are based in one state and it is where that employee is located, if they are all based in one state, then you will pay that payroll tax to that state revenue. If you do have employees over Australia in all sorts of different states and territories, then you will need to lodge and potentially pay payroll tax on those wages. It really depends on whether you have met that threshold, and also there will be an end of year reconciliation that they'll look at all of your wages across Australia and determine where you will make your final payment to. But each month, if you have employees in those states and you know you've already hit that threshold, you are liable in that state to pay those taxes.
Yeah, right. Okay. And are all payment types included within that calculation towards the threshold, or is it just standard wages? Like, how's that?
Yeah, so there are exemptions for payroll tax. Again, it's different per state and territory. So it really pays to go and find out whether your state or territory, what their inclusions are, what their exemptions are at the moment. Most of the states have payments like Defence Force payments, they're exempt. Workers' compensation payments, they're exempt from payroll tax. Some components of termination payments will also be exempt. And at the moment, government paid parental leave is also exempt. But again, it pays to check your relevant state and territory as to what exemptions you can have. And just touching on what is payable, independent contractors are also payable unless they are covered by the 90 or 100-day exemption.
And what's that exemption mean?
So it's whether they've worked, I think it's 90 days. Jasmine, you might be able to help me. It's like 90 days in the year, I think it is.
Yeah.
So it's not like 90 hours, it's actually days. So how many days they've worked in the year. So if you have someone that works once a week and they do 8 hours a day, they come in and they do labor work, they will be exempt from your payroll tax calculation.
Right. Okay. Cool. And that it's the same sort of rules within most states.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I feel like I've learned a lot about payroll tax. Anything else that you think it's worth touching on?
Oh, just that if people are worried about, oh, well, how much do I pay in payroll tax? It is a percentage of wages. So it ranges from starts at about 4% and goes up to 6.85% in the ACT, I believe it is at the moment. They are subject to change annually or when they decide to up the percentage rate. During COVID, they did bring it down, most states and territories, to help with everything that was happening during the COVID time. But it's gone back up to its normal percentage at the moment.
Right. Okay. So it varies from it can vary from year to year.
It can change, yeah. So again, be on top of your payroll tax requirements and know what the percentage is. When you lodge, though, it does tell you how much you will be paying, but it's always good for cash flow reasons to work out how much you'll be paying in the year.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. And super. So it's been a bit of change around the percentages of the super guarantee charge. Some upcoming changes around payday super, but yeah, maybe if you just want to start with talking through the payday super stuff there.
Yeah, so payday super, I'll just reiterate, it's not law yet. It's something that really the government wants super to be paid within 7 days of doing a pay run. And
currently is it quarterly?
So at the moment it is quarterly. That's the minimum when employers need to pay super. So if this comes into effect, instead of paying super 4 times a year, you could be paying it up to 52 times a year. So if you've got weekly payrolls, it'll be something that you would need to do every week with your pay run. So that was in March this year that they they're saying that they're going to start that in 2026. And also super has increased over the last couple of years. We've got another 0.5% increase happening on the 1st of July in 2025.
Yeah, sorry, that's my mistake that we've got the wrong detail there on the slide. Okay. Sorry, guys.
So 2025 is the next increase. And yeah, that's what's happening in the space of super. If people are sort of wondering what is superable as well, that we do get questions about, what do I pay super on? So we pay super on ordinary time earnings, and this can be their salary or wages, their gross earnings, and it can be things like over award payments, and commissions, shift loading, annual leave loading, some allowances, and also bonuses. They do have super on them. And just recently, the government has announced in March this year that the paid parental leave by the government will be paying super from the 1st of July in 2025. Not law yet, but it's something they are pushing so that the women and men that are on parental leave do get super. So at the moment, there's no super on their paid parental leave.
Yeah. The good thing about that one is it won't be managed by the employer. It'll be managed and actually administered by the ATO. So the ATO will actually pay that super on their behalf. So another bit of a win for employers. I think they're not having to actually pay the super themselves. It's the ATO that will manage it. And I believe that the Senate actually voted in favour of the legislation last week. So it's just waiting on royal assent now.
Amazing.
Hey, and with the payday super stuff, what's the thinking there from the government around making that change?
Oh, it's definitely happening. They released their the framework last week. So it was first announced in last year's federal budget, 2023-24, and then there was about 12 months of consultation that Treasury undertook. And as a result of that consultation, they've obviously put together proposals for government to consider around the different frameworks that might apply. And that was actually announced last Wednesday, what the framework will look like. So on the back of that, their next step is to actually draft the legislation, which they say will be done in this next quarter, September to December, and they'll be doing more consultation around what that legislation looks like.
But are they worried that it's harder for employees to track their employers making the superannuation payments if it's done quarterly rather than?
Absolutely.
That's the issue.
There's literally billions of dollars of unpaid super. On average, every employee, I'm not one of them, my super is paid on time all the time. Apparently on average, about each employee is losing around $1,800 worth of super a year. But if you add that all up, there's billions of dollars of unpaid super. A lot of employers are not paying it. And sometimes by the time the ATO is able to chase it, but on a quarterly basis, a lot of the time, particularly the smaller businesses might have gone bankrupt or insolvent, and there's no way of recovering that super for those employees.
Right.
So if it's required to be paid more regularly, then it's less likely to result in employees losing out on a lot of super. That's the intention behind it.
Right. It makes sense. I can much more easily track if I'm going to my pay slip and seeing what I've been paid for this pay, and I've been paid the super as well, and
Absolutely.
I can go, oh yeah, that looks right. So
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and I think Fiona, you can talk us through some best practice payroll tips.
Yeah.
Because maybe you just want to jump straight into it. I know we're sort of talking about, things that we sort of hear from time to time or just see. And I suppose for everyone's benefit, Fiona, manages sort of outsourced payroll for, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. So she's got a lot of experience with, different sort of payroll setups and that sort of thing, and what works and where improvements can be made as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. And one of my most favorite tips is the first one: automate or outsource your processes. So bringing automation will really help your payroll officer or your employees that are processing the pay run. Gone are the days of manual processing, getting a paper timesheet and working it all out, writing down how many hours, ordinary hours, overtime, penalties, all that sort of thing. There are now programs and platforms that can automate the payroll process for you. So that's electronic timesheets, electronic rosters. My HR Payroll has a platform that can and has pre-built awards in there, and it interprets the award for you, so that all you'll need to do is bring in your timesheet and it calculates it all for you. It also can do time and attendance. So, you've got someone clocking in and clocking off, so that you don't rely on someone writing down or typing in when they come to work. They can literally just either use their face as recognition or key in a code, and their hours are clocked already. So really simple. And outsourcing, again, so my HR Payroll does manage payroll services. So that would be giving third-party access to completing your payroll each week, fortnight, or month, and taking that away sort of in-house. That they are doing the pay run, and that's all they're focusing on. And everything, you get reports and things like that sent to you, so they can do checkoffs and final approvals. It also saves time for that particular employee that perhaps needs to focus on something else. And yeah, we really, we want to remove manual process as much as possible if it's available, and it is there. So that's definitely tip number one. So yeah, understanding relevant laws, regulations, and awards. It's really important when you're paying people to make sure you know what you can pay them and when you have to pay them, and what they're entitled to. If you don't know, seek someone like my HR or go to the APA and ask the question, hey, am I paying this person right? Am I following this, or have I interpreted this award correctly?
Yeah.
Mistakes do get made, but if they can be avoided by having that third party, or even a HR department as well within your business, knowing where you can turn to understand those things.
Didn't mean to write it.
All right, question time. And like Jasmine mentioned, like, subscribe to the Fair Work Ombudsman, subscribe to the ATO, keep up to date with what's happening in the payroll space, and make sure you're ready for any changes that do come along.
Yeah, nice.
Keeping track of payroll dates and deadlines. Yeah, know when your pay schedule is. And most people do. If it's a fortnightly and pay run and it's paid on a Wednesday, paid on the Wednesday. Don't pay it the next day. Businesses need to look at their cash flow and things like that, and ensure there's money in the bank to pay their workers. If it states on their contract that they get paid that Wednesday, you must pay on that Wednesday. Obviously, when there's a public holiday, things change, and depending on your award will depend on whether you pay prior to that public holiday or after. Usually it's before. But yeah, just make sure you know when things are due. And same with deadlines with super and payroll tax. STP lodgements, keep those going. So don't fall behind on your STP lodgements as well.
Yeah, nice. Hey, Fiona, I might just stop you there just briefly. If anyone wants to submit questions or anything, feel free just to add them to the Q&A, and we'll get to those in a moment. I just noticed we're sort of coming up to 3 p.m. But Fiona, keep going, because I think this is really good.
Yeah. So classify your employees correctly. So ensure that if they're casual, they are casual. If they're full-time, they're full-time. And make sure your employees know too. I've had previously employees think that they were full-time and they were casual, and they're asking questions like, where's my entitlements? Where's my annual leave?
Yeah.
Not understanding that they're on a casual contract or didn't even get a contract, because in some awards, there's no
That's
contract.
surprisingly common. I've heard a lot of people in that sort of situation.
Yeah, and that can be a costly mistake for businesses. So, and again, if the business doesn't correctly identify them and classify them, that can be a problem as well. So you can have fair work applications when things like that happen.
Yeah, totally.
And transparency with your employees. So mistakes do happen. And if there is a miscalculated pay, just let them know. Whether it's over, under, say, hey, I've made a mistake. I'll sort it out tomorrow, or I'll sort it out as soon as possible. And just, be on top of it. Misunderstandings with employees can really harm morale within the business. So just be really honest with all your employees. And double check data entry. So you've got someone processing your payroll, but have those second pair of eyes looking over it, making sure you've crossed your T's, dotted your I's. You've included all the things that you need to in that particular pay run. So yeah, just, there's no one system that's 100% accurate. So even if you're relying on an automated system, always have human eyes checking over to ensure that that's gone through correctly. And keep records. It's funny that even in this day and age, just some people don't think records are important. And they are. So if you do have an automated or an outsourced program, they will have reports within the system that you can pull at any moment's time. That's the beauty of using an automated system. So definitely keep as many records as you can on your employees, on your pay runs, on STP lodgements, on bank confirmations, all those sorts of things. And last one, invest in your payroll department. So invest in professional development for your payroll officers. Invest in, just in software. Invest in the software to help them do the pay run. Don't be afraid to upskill your employees.
Yeah, totally. No, those are great tips, Fiona. Thank you for that. That's awesome. And they, a lot of them sort of seem, I don't know, like I feel like we've seen our fair share of businesses who need that list of tips, right? And so no, that's great. Okay, so it's about 3 minutes to 3. Look, any questions? There's been no questions in the Q&A thus far, which is fine. Last opportunity now. If anyone does have any questions for the team, feel free to submit them now. Otherwise, feel free to send us an email. You can find the details of both my HR and the Australian Payroll Association online. Oh, we've got a question. Okay, so is there no way of getting your super back if your employer goes into liquidation?
Yeah, well, look, that's a bit more of an employee question, but generally it's similar to an employee's wages. Unfortunately, when an employer is bankrupt or goes into liquidation, employee entitlements sit at the bottom end of who gets paid last. When all of whatever's left, if there's anything left for that employer, if there's any monies left, they are unfortunately one of the last ones to get any potential payout. So that's why payday was one of the reasons payday super has been introduced, is to try and alleviate that. And also just to give the ATO ability to chase up super earlier from those employers that are deliberately, specifically not paying superannuation. Unfortunately, there's a lot more than what we would think there are.
Right. Okay, cool. I think that answers that one. Any other questions? Feel free to submit those now. Otherwise, I was going to say, oh, we got another one. What is the trickiest payroll mistake you have had to correct? And what did you do to fix this? Oh, it's a good question.
Oh, I've got one, but yeah, Jasmine.
Okay, you go. No, you go. I'm like, it's been a while since I've run a payroll myself.
I think one of the trickiest, and it was quite recently, is a massive overpayment. Very, very large. I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars incorrectly paid to an employee. And when that happens, it's like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? And, that particular business asked the employee to return the variance of the funds, which he did. So one way would be, yes, you need to ask that employee to recoup those funds, apologize and profusely, and set up payroll firewalls along the way. Make sure you've got people checking the payroll and where or who's getting what money each pay run, and having those checks in place. So that's what we did. We made sure we've got extra checks, extra eyes. We did all sorts of reports with VLOOKUPs and all that sort of thing to identify any changes from pay to pay,
Mhm.
and then normal net and gross pay, to ensure that it was literally, it would just stick out and we would see it. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Jasmine, any
Look, the one that comes to mind is probably one of my previous employers just after I had started there. It had been worked out that in the bonus pay run, this employer paid massive amounts of bonuses once a year. And the pay code had been set up incorrectly and everyone was taxed wrong. Everyone was majorly overtaxed on their bonuses because it wasn't set up with the correct tax treatment and just taxed them all in one pay period. So, I mean, not a great deal I could do about it having come in after this happened. But what I found was we corrected it. We obviously created a new pay code for bonuses to make sure they were taxed correctly going forward. But then every single year after that, at bonus payment time, the managing director would come and stand by my desk and go, "Have you checked the tax on the bonuses this year, Jasmine?" "Yes, John, I have." Just do a spot check on some of them, just a sense check that actually the system is still doing the right thing, because sometimes you can't just rely on your system to do the right thing if the person who set it up incorrectly to start with. So spot checking, things like that is always very beneficial.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so sorry, there's a hand raised. If that person who I think I saw a raised hand, if they had a question, feel free to submit it in the Q&A. I'll just give you a couple sec. Oh, here we go. Oh, this one's a beefy one. If the worker has been underpaid unintentionally, does the business need to backdate payment when employee already signed the contract with the agreed rate? The employee has been set up under a specific award but different level of pay.
Yeah, I can probably answer that one. So absolutely, you need to back pay them. An employee cannot contract out of their correct rate of pay. So just because an employee has signed a contract accepting that rate, if that rate is less than their award rate, then that's an underpayment, and a contract does not override that. So absolutely, you would need to backdate that payment. Yeah, and you need to do a back pay for them.
Yeah. Nice. Thanks, Jasmine. Okay, cool. Well, we might. Oh, got another one. Okay. How do you tax if an employee wants to cash out 2 weeks of leave in addition to their weekly pay? Do you split it over 3 periods or tax as one?
I can probably answer that one as well.
Yeah.
You can actually tax that in the same way that you would tax a bonus. It's the same tax table. It's called Schedule 5, which is the tax table for back pays, commissions, bonuses, and similar payments. So essentially anything that is a lump sum payment that's not part of their ordinary pay would fall under those similar payments. It's often referred to as the marginal tax calculation. You might hear that from your payroll provider, but essentially it is a different tax calculation.
Cool. Okay. I hope that one that answers that question. So yeah. All right. I think we're done for questions. I think we've gone a bit over. So thank you, Jasmine and Fiona, for today's session. It's been really informative. I know myself personally, I've learned a lot. And thank you everyone for attending today's session. Just before I wrap, a couple of points. The recording, as I mentioned, will be available. I think it will go out via email, and it will also be available on our website as well as a few other places. If you did have a question, feel free to send that across to us. You can find my HR and Australian Payroll Association online, and as well as how to get in touch with us. And yeah, as I mentioned, we run these webinars typically on a monthly basis. So be on the lookout for next month's session. And yeah, thank you so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great remainder of the day. Cheers.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Jasmine.
Thanks for having me.